So let's do this thing. Adam,
Let's go.
Adam, thank you so much for
Hello.
being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, especially on literally minutes notice.
I know it was perfect. Perfect.
Hey, this would be a fun thing to do in 20 minutes. I also have to eat lunch and read the whole document that we're going to discuss, but let's do it. Here we are.
It solves the problem for me because I didn't know what I wanted to stream today. I knew I wanted to stream, so you've solved that riddle for me.
And I knew I wanted to design stuff, but I have my wrist currently in a brace. I don't know what it is. Between typing and video games and everything. And this is like a chronic problem I have on tour. I'm a touring bass player. My left hand, my fretting hand, has a lot of wrist problems when I just work.
Mm.
Which is weird because I'm right-handed, but my left wrist is the one that's in pain. That is all to say. I can't really type very good today. There's this big like ball in the center of my hand. It's part of the brace. Um, so whenever I'm typing, I'm also holding down Control or Alt, and I'm doing all kinds of bad keyboard commands. So this will allow me to exercise my brain and rest my wrist at the same time.
Perfect. So we'll just have an audio capture of all of your thoughts and our thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is an hour-long voice notes that's made public.
So I'm gonna, I'll so because somebody asked what Lumen is, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But
Yeah,
but feel free to introduce yourself in case somehow somebody's watching this and they know you and they don't know me, which I guess is
sure.
possible. Uh,
My name is Adam Vass, and I'm a tabletop game designer in Southern California. I am often, or I guess I do business as World's Champ Game Co., which is my publishing suite where I publish my own games, mostly in print. And I'm also one half of the Brain Trust podcast with Will Yobst. Uh, we do, and then tangentially, we started the Brain Trust community Discord server. So, um, hopefully, one of those at least sounds familiar to anyone who stumbled here.
I just listened to today's episode, or the one that you most recently released about the Tech Jam.
Yeah,
Super excited about Tech Jam. That's such a cool idea. And now I understand
I
what you mean by SRD without the S.
right. I submitted a project this morning called 2D6, which is just musing on what you can gather, what information you can gather from a single roll of two six-sided dice, and
From
how you could
from your
do
most
that
recent
in.
zine, right?
Well, yeah. So actually, my most recent zine is called No Game. I have a copy right here. So do you? Um, where I was like, well, this zine is about making games. It's not necessarily for game content. But I had this idea on using 2D6 where the sum is a bell curve, so you can kind of build probabilities around that. But then you also have each distinct value of 1 through 6 that are linear distributions, which means every chance between 1 and 6 has equal uh, probability that it'll be a result. And so, how you can in a game design consider that a 2d6 can give you really like 9 different values, and how much of those do you want to combine, and how much of them do you want to just ignore. So the document I put up today for Tech Jam expands on what I wrote in No Game. So No Game has the 2d6 bell curve and the 1d6 linear curve. Then today I added to that the difference. So if you subtract the lower d6 from the higher d6, there's also, I think, some spatial stuff that I touch on. There's a thought I had as soon as I published it that if you multiply the two dice, you have a different result. And that one was interesting too, because there's only two integers that appear more than once. So you have 16 out of 20 are unique results, and then two pairs of two to finish out that 20 that each appear double. So anyway,
That's awesome. That's fucking
Tech
awesome.
Tech Jam is, I mean, this is how I think of Tech Jam, and I think there's going to be a lot of more interesting and dynamic contributions, hopefully. Um, but for me, it was an opportunity to get a lot of the statistical probability stuff that I think about in game design and cut some of the fat and make it more accessible to other game designers, because obviously a lot of what we do is consider probability, but not everybody wants to and not everybody likes to. and even I like statistics and math and stuff, but I don't know how to use any dice, which is sort of the thing everyone
Oh yeah.
uses to generate the probability curves of their rolls. But I don't know how to program or use that language, so I am in here with my notebook doing math and finding these probability spreads.
I thought you were making a very bold claim that you don't know how to use any dice at all, and I was like, wow, powerful, powerful words from a game designer. Um,
uh,
Sweet. I love the tech jam idea. I remember when I was looking through No Game, like not only is this just a beautiful zine, but yeah, once you started talking about this, what you can do with like a D6 roll and a 2D6 roll, like there's a lot to it. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with it. So I love it.
and it's kind of invisible too, because when you read a game that says roll 2d6, the extremely common reason for doing that is generating a single sum value between 2 and 12 that statistically is more likely to be between 6 and 8.
Right.
So, and that on its own is really interesting and good tech. But I liked blowing that out, showing you can still have that and these other supplemental systems on the same roll and get a lot of information. And I hope, I mean, the other thing with the tech jam is we're offering these ideas that doesn't have a system. I kind of use a case study as I go through it. In the zine, it was playing ghosts and generating curses that you lay on
Mm.
people who come to your haunted home. In the document this morning, it's being a mage that has no real understanding or control of their powers. So whenever you try to use magic, you have all these randomized fields from a single roll on how that magic is implemented. But those are both just, rather than it being an SRD, a system reference document, these don't presuppose a system. This is just a reference document to a theory. And I think that's exciting because I want to see how it can be implemented in other stuff. And I kind of threw it out there as I'm not working on anything currently that's going to use this 2d6 web. Um, so have at it, because I would be interested in reading that, but it's not something on my plate right now.
Hell yes. It's awesome. I can't wait to see the jam fill up with cool tech and scrounge through it and see if it sparks any ideas. Um,
Speaking of cool tech and sparks,
haha.
we're we're going over Lumen.
Talking
Uh,
about Lumen.
is is this still somewhat private information? It's not publicly released yet.
So Lumen is not publicly released yet. It is if you're in the Gila RPGs Discord, it's public information. There's
Yeah.
I have it pinned somewhere for folks to look at, but it's not publicly out in like an official release capacity because I want to ultimately try and line up a few things at once, like a game jam to go with it. And right now, it doesn't look good. It's just a Google Doc, which has been converted to a PDF for you to read.
Sure.
And so it's currently being made to look much nicer by MV. MV is doing layout and like making a cool logo for it. So when that is done, we will do like the official release. But I wanted folks who were interested in the SRD to get early access so that they could start tinkering with it so that inevitably when the jam is out, we could just like throw a huge wave at it right away, which would be pretty cool. Because there's always that
Yeah.
fear when you start a jam, like, oh god, no one's gonna submit anything
That was
to it.
that was why I made 2d6 as soon as I woke up this morning. I poured my coffee and I started typing because the tech jam was live and I knew there was nothing in the pocket. So I
Right.
needed there to be at least one. And I think too, you get the opportunity as the host to say like, here's what I have in mind. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the same thing in mind,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something, especially as something as broad as tech jam, to say, um, like this works, right? Like here is a single implementation of this concept. So I think with the Lumen Jam too, you want at least one game, because it's one thing to see the tech and it's another to see it uh, brought to life in some form.
For sure. For sure. So let's talk about Lumen and let's talk about your project or like what
Yes.
you're kind of bouncing around. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, Lumen is the name of the system by which my game Light was made. Frame was also made using it, which is now being brought into the. It's very. Don't wake the gamers. They'll find us. Um, which has been turned into Nova, which is going to be an upcoming release. So it is a system that is rules light, designed for honestly like pretty much like a power fantasy for those sorts of video game genres that are like looter shooters or hero shooters, which is I think the name of the genre for things like Overwatch and Apex Legends and things like that, or your dungeon crawls like your Diablos. Basically any game where you have like a character that has three, four, five, maybe powers that they have, and then that's it. It's kind of like a small kit that you work with, but those small that small list of powers makes you feel very badass, very cool, and helps you perfectly kind of encapsulate a role, keeping it light like that so things move quick. Um, and the basic premise of the game is that there's no skill lists. There's no like I have a +1 in pistols, but I'm not good at shotguns or something like that. But instead, everything is resolved with rolls from three attributes, which I generally tend to think of as you have one that's related to like big, powerful actions, one that's for speedy and quick things, and the other one for like slow, methodical ideas and actions, practiced surgical approaches. Although that's not like set in stone. If you have three other attributes that you're interested in doing, then of course you can do that. But the point of Lumen is that what matters is you are playing extremely capable characters, and so it's not if you can do it, it's how you're doing the thing that matters. So it's how you're describing it and lining it up with the attribute that matters, rather than being limited to just being able to do the things that you have skill points in or anything like that. Um, so I know when you messaged me, you had a game in mind that you wanted to kind of play around with. What game was that?
Yeah. So actually, to my right here, I have my sticky wall of things I'm working on, things I want to work on. Um, it says "Pies in the Sky" is the name of the chart, because when I find the spoons and the time and the energy, those are things I'd like to develop, but they're not necessarily on a release schedule. And uh, one of the sticky notes says Paragon, which parentheses Overwatch slash Pathfinder. The idea that I want to make a game and so this is also a thing that I have been interacting with, most recently with Scratch and Claw that came out yesterday. Um, is the idea that there's no character creation rules,
Hmm.
and I think it's interesting because it's not necessarily something that a lot of people play with on a design front, because you obviously want players to be able to be whatever they want to be. That's super important and good. I know it's good. I think I'm interested in it conceptually as um, something that's like beyond lightning fast, right? Like you're literally playing the game without doing any setup.
Hmm.
So in Scratch and Claw, you have character cards. Um, I was hoping I'd had one within reach, but I don't. Uh, you have these cards that each one has a scratch off area, like a lottery ticket, and underneath it, it reveals to you who your character is. It gives you what animal species you are, what your skills are, what your starting item is, that sort of stuff. Um, and you can still make it your own aesthetically. You can add name, pronouns, what their look is like how they dress, just flair. But you don't need to come up with a skill list,
Hmm.
and you don't need to assign values to those skills. Once you scratch off, you know everything there is to know mechanically, and you're in the game. So, with what I'm calling Paragon,
Mm-hmm.
is a game that has pre-built characters that you play as the characters. And I think this is a thing that's novel about Overwatch is, and I think it's a thing. So I'll admit I haven't played Overwatch in quite a while, probably like 2 years.
Probably the
But I
same
was
for me as well.
but I was into it for a while. It was hot. I think a fascinating thing about Overwatch and its appeal is how character driven it is.
Mm,
Like you want to, they each have such distinct personalities and skill sets. So depending how you approach it, because Overwatch obviously there's not really any kind of role playing or immersion into that character's thing
mm,
beyond the way that how their personality is implemented into their build. So, uh, like Tracer, who is this extremely fast character with two handguns that fire automatically, like these really fast bursts, and you can skip through space and stuff, basically using like a skip, like a Nightcrawler or the Flash, kind of
mm,
like really fast movement. Those all are reflective of the personality that Tracer is built with. That is like kind of spunky, a little bit pranky. Like her special is she throws a bomb and then she like gets the hell out of there before the bomb goes off.
right.
And it's kind of like when you tap someone on the shoulder and you move before they turn around, but with death. So I think there's a really interesting thing that's a little bit invisible, or I guess it's behind the curtain until you peek. That these Overwatch skill builds and how their guns work, how their guns feel, is all reflective of their character's personality.
Mm,
So a thing that I'm interested in this build, in this game theory, is to make pre-gen characters that have some heart aspect that can be reflected in their skills and abilities. And also because we're doing role playing games and because I primarily focus on uh, story driven or narrative immersive kind of games rather than play by play combat stuff.
mm,
Um, I want there to be an opportunity for players to inhabit the personality of that character too. So to play as Tracer in combat means you get these guns and you move really fast and you move kind of in a frenzy. In the role playing session, when you're not firing guns, you also have kind of all the information you need to portray a Tracer character because you know it's high energy,
right.
it's kind of intense, but in like a fun
Trickster,
way.
chaotic sort of way.
So I think having a game that has a preset roster, and this is the other thing too, of like when you have a preset roster, you have presupposing setting.
Hmm.
Um, and Overwatch does this excellently because just through these like 3 to 5 minute cinematic videos, they tell you kind of what you want and they give you these little nuggets of like what the world is like. And they do a lot with environmental. I'm on a deep tangent. They do a lot with environmental storytelling too, of like this level is this city,
Mm,
and there are posters in this city for an exhibition at the History Museum for this big mechanical fist. And then um, one day you log on and the map has like the History Museum glass shattered, and you're like, uh oh, that big fist
right.
is probably coming out. And then they bring in a new character who uses that is Doomfist, right? That's the name.
Yeah.
That was towards the end of my involvement. Um, but anyway, I think all that stuff is super ripe for tabletop as long as you can get a player to understand and be down with the idea that this character is not necessarily yours or like you get to be this character, but the extent to which you customize it is limited to retain the values of the game design.
That's cool. That's cool. That's an interesting idea. That concept of this character is not yours, but you will inhabit it for a period of time.
I think there's fun stuff to play with too in the sort of anti-canon design space of like I'm gonna play. I just will keep using their names. I'm gonna play Tracer in our tabletop game, and I can. establish truths about my tracer that aren't canon. So like our group's Overwatch has its own lineage and history
Mm.
that we're creating. And then with that too, you can create it in two directions. So you can create a history and you can create a future. And that's compelling, and that's, I think, something that good story games rely on, obviously, is your ability to affect your circumstance and to make it what you want to make it.
Mm-hmm.
I think being pre-supplied with a character does not stop you from doing that. If anything, I think it gives you a little bit more to go on. Um, you think of an example like the backgrounds in Troika, where I have a list of items and skills and maybe two or three sentences of flavor. I didn't build this character. I didn't choose to be the Demon Slayer. It was a 2d6 roll on it, and I was generated it. Uh, but I have enough here to make a Demon Hunter my character and use this information that's applied to me to act in a way that the design intends, that I can also explore with some player freedom. It's an interesting balance of agency that I think I would like to explore as a designer, as almost like a challenge. And to come full circle and to bring it back into what you're doing, this work, it gives you the opportunity to make booster packs, drop new characters, and have a roster of 10 characters at launch, and then release 2 to 4 new characters every couple of months and use them to expand the world that you're in, while also giving players more options for play and keeping eyes on a project that's living.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hoping to accomplish with Light, right? Is by having those seasons, it updates the story, right? So if the season 1 ended with this strike that alludes to the story and where it's going to go with season 2. When that happens, you get a little bit more in this established world that you can play around with. Um, some real gamer strats here in terms of how we're designing and releasing our games. Very good, very good. I love it.
I
Uh,
think too, I listened to a lot of the discussions you have and Jeremy uh, about live RPGs,
mm.
and there's some aspect of me that takes it personally as the champion of print, right? Of like, I could do this if I want to. uh, and so to some extent, I mean, like I said, this is a pie in the sky. This is something, a project I was planning on working on today.
Mm,
Um, to some extent, this is to test that theory. Can I
right.
make a live print game? So, uh, and I think I can. I think it will just take some clever implementation. But
If anyone can figure it out, you can figure it out.
I hope you're right. Let's come back to the Lumen document,
Yeah.
uh, and we'll kind of gloss that. I have it open.
Mm,
You don't need to have it open and shared and stuff. I'll just kind of throw you some
sure.
stuff. Um, I think the document already starts off really strong as saying like, here's what this system does. It is for power fantasies. It is for characters that primarily engage in combat, or like
Mm,
combat is the main way in which you interact with play, and it is driven by a loop, whatever that loop looks like. To In a video game way, it's to do the same thing differently a bunch of times, as many
right.
times as you want. I mean, really, Overwatch is this. Each game, each match is, 10 to 15 minutes, 6v6, with an objective, which is usually moving a payload or claiming a space.
Right.
Um, and I think we'll get to that later, but implementing match types
Mm,
is really interesting to me, especially as the Overwatch conversion.
right.
Um, because with looter shooters, with Destiny and stuff, there, and again, I played Destiny 2014, so I have like a really bad, not thorough take on it.
Mm,
But primarily, there's not so much matches as there are like combat instances,
mm,
right? So like we can do a dungeon delve in Destiny, and we know that there's 3 to 5 kind of like stop gaps between the entrance and the final battle, along which there are enemies generated and we fight them and we go through. And then at the end, we get some items and we kind of just go about our lives.
Right.
In Overwatch, those doses are a lot smaller and they're a little bit less consequential because I think in a video game sense, it's designed to keep you playing. I did a 10-minute match. We won or we didn't. Well, I can play another 10 minutes,
Right.
like, and you just keep going into this match cycle. Destiny, a little bit, or at least in my experience, has those jumping points of like, you got your rewards and it's kind of quiet right now. So, like, that seems like a good time to shut the system off.
Right.
Um, I don't know how that theory works into role playing, but I like the idea of having in Paragons, and this is also a part of the SRD that you have here of is that it's sort of it's a loop.
Mm-hmm.
So in Overwatch, the sort of pretense is that you're doing missions to like save the world, I guess, which is made more clear in the cinematic stuff, but not necessarily in actual play. Which is a thing that I put a pin in. But the idea of like in Overwatch, you have the whole character roster, which includes good people and bad people, and they can be on the same team
Right.
because whatever. So there's a distinction I think between Overwatch as a cinematic canon that involves gameplay because you look at events and like the players versus all kind of stuff where we're fighting robots, we're not fighting other players.
Right.
Um, and there's a preset roster of who goes on this mission, which is also very interesting
Yeah.
because you can write as a designer, you can write a mission and say only these characters get to be involved. Um, I think the PVE aspect of Overwatch, instead of the 6 versus 6, or having 6 versus 6 with distinct lines for good and bad,
Right.
is more interesting to me because I want team comp. Team comp is such an interesting part, especially if you look at competitive video games, esports and stuff.
Right.
Team comp's important. I want team comp to feel important here, but I also want it to make narrative sense where you don't just have the biggest, most evil person and the funniest, most goofy person on the same team because your players want to play them.
Right.
Um, so let's get into building something real quick.
Let's do it.
I think we got enough of theory.
We've got
Um,
we got the premise set up here.
so Lumen uses D6 pools,
Mm-hmm.
and you roll a number of dice and look for the highest result compared to this trisected range of results. Um, so 1 to 2 is failure and consequence. 3 to 4 is success with complication, and 5 to 6 is success with no problems. Um, and those dice pools are dictated by your attributes.
Right.
So, the thing that I was taking notes on while you were speaking earlier is the attributes in light and seemingly also in Nova are shared, right? Every character has the same 3 attributes.
Correct.
Not doing that here.
Ah,
There's
excellent. I knew somebody had to
first
do it.
number one break is especially because these characters are bespoke, that their attributes are bespoke. And that's another thing I just love doing. Like Scratch and Claw has it, but Cyber Metal 2012, the bigger project that I'm working on currently, also has it. Of you, there's not necessarily a shared skill list that you choose from. There's your skill list because, and to come back to Overwatch, a tank's skill list is going to inherently be different than a DPS or a healer or all these different subcategories of character. So I think that's reflected in not just their abilities, which is a major part of it, and that's going to probably be the juiciest thing to grab onto here today.
Right.
And I don't know if we will because it's already been like half an hour because I just am so excited. I think having attributes dictated by your character type is really interesting.
Mm.
And it also allows for a lot more dynamic problem solving when it's like, oh, do you have a higher stealth score than I have, so you should roll for that. I don't I don't like that style of play.
Mm,
That is what shared skill lists do to me is it's character specialization, but it's player specialization and it's player optimization in a way that feels trite. Like I want my character to sneak behind this wall just because you have a +3 stealth and I have a +2 doesn't mean I'm gonna just like tell you to do it because it's one, it's quarterbacky. I don't like that in games. I don't
mm,
like when there's one person calling shots for everybody. But two, it was my idea. I want to do it.
right,
So I think a lot of the time, and this doesn't eliminate that possibility, but having unique attributes allows you to really focus on the stuff that you do and do well. And it shapes how you think about how your character acts.
right.
Like, I think Widowmaker in Overwatch is a really exceptional example of this because she's a sniper and she only really snipes. She has the grapple gun, uh, and she can use that to get to sniping positions and stuff.
Right.
Basically, her whole kit is designed to keep her away from everyone else, and in doing so, have advantageous positioning and be able to use her gun to the best of her abilities. She has this like burst fire if she ends up in the shit, if somebody's right there.
Right.
But then that's also when the grapple gun comes in and she's like, I got to get the fuck out of here. So I think that's all really great attribute consideration for a particular play style. And all those games have it cooked in, right?
Mm,
Those are so those are black or those are Widowmaker's attributes, right?
right.
Those are um I would say snipe is one or like range or something like that. Um and then I wouldn't necessarily put the grapple gun. I think escape maybe or
Ah.
leverage or some kind of like more broad umbrella term because the other thing about this is again we're making characters that are pre-built but we want there to be enough flexibility to support player style and player creativity
Mm-hmm.
because if I say you have a grapple gun to get to leverage that's one thing but if I say you have a skill that allows you to gain leverage you get to define that and you
Right.
get to explore that and use it fun ways so that's neat. Um, and then I guess what would be a third Widowmaker? I think there's a the other thing I wrote down is I like the idea that one of your attributes is not necessarily combat focused because I do foresee an aspect of this game that is a little bit more play by play,
Mm,
living in the world. And I think Widowmaker's story attribute here would be something like espionage,
nice.
which under espionage you could put like disguises or intelligence. I think there's probably a hacker kind of aspect or like a sombra skill
Mm,
set. They share some DNA there of like the way that they solve problems, and these aren't necessarily battlefield problems. They're just all the problems that come up in their line of work involve these like spy tactics. So I think right there you have a pretty solid Widowmaker attribute spread. And
that's cool too because like leverage is not only leverage in combat, but you could then use leverage as interpret it in non-combat as well. Of like you are Widowmaker, you're a badass assassin. You know how to get leverage on people who are in your way.
yeah, diplomats have heard of you and they're afraid of you.
Right,
You come face to face with one, you have an advantageous social situation created by an attribute that I think on its face you think again of combat, but this isn't just a combat implementation. Same with espionage. You could make a case for how espionage gets you positioning in combat.
right. This is good. MV said that you broke Lumen in 10 minutes, and it's perfect. It's perfect. I love this idea of playing around with the attributes to have them unique to the characters. So this seems like a good set for Widowmaker, a good starting set for her.
I think to come back to Scratch and Claw, it has Scratch and Claw is a game that I made about mutant animals in a post-human wasteland. So it's the Warriors meets Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and each character is under the scratch off area like a lotto ticket, and it has procedurally generated everything. Um, but since no one has it in their hand yet, because I just shipped them yesterday,
Mm.
uh, every character gets 3 skills. And when I built the spreadsheet, I built them as physical, mental, and social because it's kind of what people have come to
Right.
expect from a standard tabletop. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have uh, everyone's is different, and there's 30 to 60 possibilities in each category. So again, you have just infinite possibilities combinations. So if I get a character that's a camel and my social skill is dancing, like then you as a player get to figure out how those things work together and how what situation you can create that will allow you to use your dancing skill. And I
Right.
think there's something exceptionally fun of saying, here are the limited tools you have to solve problems, and we're going to throw all kinds of problems at you. So it's up to you to figure out in what way they make sense.
Right.
And so having 3 attributes, this Widowmaker spread feels really nice because it gives you combat and non-combat rationale in everything and just how you choose to use it. And you know that that's my other thing of like throwing out a subjective term as a
Right.
skill and letting the players figure out how to interpret that in the moment. That's my bread and butter. That's everything. So I think something like leverage is inherently cooler and more unique than something like escape. Um, let's do another one real quick,
Yeah.
and then we'll because I had my thought was actually I was going to do a Reinhardt example because I think a tank is really easy, but let's not do easy. Let's do a healer. Let's do Mercy
Mercy.
because
Okay.
healing is really interesting conceptually, and it exists in D&D, and you have like party optimization. Like we
Mm.
need somebody who can cure wounds or whatever. Um, but I think in a lot of other games, you just don't care. Either everyone can heal. A lot of my games just say like if you do drugs, you are healed, and that's
Mm.
fine. Because I don't necessarily find it interesting to play a healing character, except in Overwatch, because I'm not the front lines person. I'm not the main character. I think a lot of the time when I play in the LARPs that I've done and in bigger kind of party or games, I don't want to be the host. I don't want to be the star. I want to help people do their thing.
Right.
Like, and I think that's a really interesting. The other thing, Mercy is going to be fun to poke at here, but there are a lot of abilities in Overwatch for like damage boosting,
Mm.
like or protection. I think the way in which you help other characters is really interesting. Mercy's the most obvious like field medic allegory, and even with a sort of lore of Overwatch, it's kind of a one-to-one cleric thing here. A little bit faith-based, a little
Right.
whatever. So anyway, think right away your first attribute for a mercy healer character is healing, but I think that maybe isn't so exciting on its
Mm.
own, right? Especially when there are other systems. There are going to be a lot of systems intertwined here. So I think you take healing, and in a similar escape slash leverage kind of scenario, you blow it out into a word that has a little bit less directed play
Mm.
and a little bit more because the other thing, Mercy is a support class, and at first in my notes I was going to say just what your first attribute is, whatever class you are,
Yeah, I
tank,
was gonna say
healer,
support.
DPS. So I think support is still a good like class umbrella. I guess yeah. You know what? First attribute is support because I think that mirrors rhymes with Widowmaker's first one being range.
Mm.
It is like you're defining play style, and I think to establishing a sort of template here is really handy because I can take any kind of character archetype and understand it from these attributes.
Right.
And then from let's try to rapid fire this. So we have support, and I think support kind of wields the notion of healing and of damage boost.
Right.
Mercy has the staff that's yellow or blue, depending on if she's restoring HP or increasing DPS, and those both fall under support. I think you also obviously you get emotional support from that. There's going to be a lot of role playing opportunity there for non-combat use of the support attribute. Um, as a point of order, each character in Lumen has 3 attributes. How do you generate what the value of those attributes are?
It kind of depends on the game. So in light, for example, all the attributes start at 1, and then you have 4 points to spend on them to increase them, in whatever way you want. So that's how it works for light, for example. You could also go the approach of this is just the package deal, like these are your starting stats sort of thing in
Yeah,
um, but in light to give at least some flexibility. So like 2 people could be playing a witch, and they could have very different ways that they approach things. One is a very speedy witch, the other one is a more slow, methodical witch, for example.
I so I think I like offering number pack and
Mm,
say you have 2 2 3,
mm,
or you have 4 1 1, like something where you're gonna, like, for the example of Reinhardt, like I think Reinhardt has a 4 in protect and then has a 1 in everything else he does,
right.
because that's his main shit. He has the big ass shield that everyone hangs out behind, and you can't swing your hammer while the shield is out. So like having a point system that is not point buying.
Mm,
Saying so in light, you said you start with 3 and you have 4 points, so you have a total of 7 to distribute among
right.
3 attributes. I think I will just say, as a designer here, you are still going to get 7. Everything starts at 0, and you assign these 3 values, so 2 2 3,
Mm,
4 4 1 2, or like anything, any 3 integers that add up to 7. And I think that I also get to play with my fun probability kink here and figure out all the permutations of 3 numbers. um it's interesting. 3 3 1 is another, like, I'm pretty dang good at these 2 things, and I have this other one that's on the list, but I kind of suck at.
mm,
That's the other interesting aspect of offering these integer packs, is 1 kind of never is good. Like 1 is never,
right.
but it's on your list, and it's still better than a 0, the attributes that don't exist on your list. Um, I think this needs a system for doing something that isn't on your list, which is probably just a disadvantage D6, I would say. Um,
Yeah, when I had
because
originally
again,
written light before I did the point buy thing, it was possible for characters to have 0 points in an attribute, and so it was a 2d6 take the lower. Um,
yeah,
and then I phased that out so that at least everything started with 1 point, and then you bought points into increasing things.
there's something I like about understanding that my skill list will never encapsulate my entire character.
Right.
Instead, it highlights the things that my character is best at. And I think the SRD also says, like, if you're trying to figure out how to roll something and you don't have attributes for it, like maybe it doesn't require a roll.
Mm,
Um, but I think in this instance, like if Mercy wants to punch someone,
mm,
punching's not going to be on Mercy's skill list. She can try. It's probably not going to go well. And I
mm,
think that really, when you have these attribute lists that are focused, you have the opportunity to do other challenging things that don't fall under your attribute umbrella. You're just not going to have a great time, because again, it's not really Mercy's role to be punching people.
right.
But if Roadhog was there, let Roadhog punch somebody. That's going to be great. Um, so it comes back to this, like, optimizing your team build.
Mm,
And um, just as a couple fleeting thoughts, as well, quick build Mercy real quick. Um, no 2 players can be the same character.
right.
These aren't archetypes, these are named characters. Each one has an illustration, and you get a character select screen, which is really cool. I think that's something a lot of games
Yes.
like video games love. I love it when I get to play a fighting game or a wrestling game and I just see the ensemble and they all have like their shot, like their one pose, right?
Right.
As a game designer, you don't get to do that because anyone can be anybody,
Mm.
and that's cool. That's really great. I want that experience though, of it, especially as a game designer, and especially as someone who focuses so much on visual design in my tabletop games. To say, here's my 12 big bad MFers, and you get to be one of them.
Right.
That's super cool to me. So let's abandon Mercy. Let's move on because we're coming up on an hour, and I have a meeting in an hour.
Oh, okay.
But I want to explore more of Lumen through this lens.
I want to
Um,
ask you a quick question because MV had a question, which is,
yeah,
does
shoot.
every character have their own sort of integer pack or number pack when it comes to things, or are you gonna just have like,
Yeah,
here's the packs, apply it to your
no, no,
character?
no. They'll be applied per character. So
Okay.
like, so in the example, we have our Widowmaker build. Widowmaker, I think, is pretty rounded through all of those. I think you get the 2-2-3
Mm,
spread for a total of 7 because you don't necessarily want the Widowmaker player to have like a 5-1-1 where all they do is snipe.
right.
And you could have that for another build, something like I mean, realistically, Mercy could have that where support is a 5.
Right.
But by me giving you the opportunity to say Mercy has support, uh, comfort, I guess that kind of falls under support, and uh, emergency preparedness or something like that, like just
Sure.
off the top of my head, you could have a build where she's a 1 support, 1 comfort, 5 emergency preparedness,
Mm,
and then you just made her a different build using the Legos I gave you.
right.
And that's interesting. That's cool. And it's going to support a different style of play that I kind of accommodated, but not really.
Mm,
Like I gave you the option. I told you what I thought would be the best. You did your own thing. And I think we're all happy here.
right.
So I think a number pack gets assigned to the character, but it still allows the player to assign the numbers to the things they want to do in play. And I think maybe too, this is a tangent, not well thought out necessarily, is you could change it between sessions.
Mm,
Like, because the other thing about Overwatch is you want a different team build for like the King of the Hill match than you would for an Escort the Payload match. So I think there's something to team optimization and character optimization per a given mission.
right.
So the idea that you're still Mercy, you still have the same attributes and powers and stuff. But in this one, I'm going to take my points out of support and put it into emergency preparedness. It's a different story,
Right.
especially as, again, as something I want this to be a combat thing, but I want there to be non-combat missions and I want there to be non-combat scenes, or I guess like not even antagonistic moments of role play.
Right.
So how do you use your attributes when you're at the Heroes Day parade and there's no terrorist attack? It's just a chill ass day.
Right.
Um, but there's still just like things that you need to do and get done. So that's all interesting. That's compelling to me. We're gonna move past attributes and stuff. I think I successfully busted that open
You did.
in
You
a way that feels really fun.
cracked it wide open, and I
Um,
love it.
then I think the next most important thing is your your powers.
Right.
So also in the Lumen doc, you have what a character needs is your attributes, your health, which I think I would loop health in with resource in this instance because I'll touch on that real quick before we move on. Your health is a power fantasy, so you are probably not going to die, but you still can hit 0 HP, and that's its own thing. And then resource is spendable, renewable function that you use to interact with your powers because powers don't use dice or powers don't use dice to determine their success.
Right.
And then powers are your class specializations. So these are like your strong moves. These are your character specific thing. And obviously, that already like that would be the bread and butter already of an Overwatch take on Lumen real easy.
Right.
You can have the same attributes. You can have, I mean, frankly, your attributes can just be like support, damage, and uh, a tank or something like that. Like have the
Sure.
class each be attribute and then assign your own numbers, and that works, and that's fine. Um, Powers would still be this class specialization thing. I think looping powers back into attributes is what makes it Overwatch. And it, real quick, health and resource. Obviously, characters in Overwatch have health, and when you die, you just respawn, and there's realistically not a big penalty, except for the resource in Overwatch, which is this charging meter,
Right.
that's kind of slowly just building as you play. And I think it goes up when you kill folks or when
Right.
you do your thing. So like Mercy's special charges when she's healing. And when you die, that meter, I can't remember if it resets to 0 or if it just knocks you. Um, but right there, you have your health meter as a measure between 0 and 100, where 0 is you're the you're the least you're not incapable of doing your stuff.
Mm.
You're still completely capable, but you're furthest from being able to really mess things up in a mechanical way.
Right.
And then as that goes up, and this is a thing I think of too in Necronautilus, where life, which is HP, and vitality, is a spectrum between 0 and 30. And you kind of are rewarded depending in both directions, but play encourages you to choose a direction
Right.
and go in that direction, which is generally up. Um, I think here we have that interesting thing. This is also, I'll give a little insight. Cyber Metal 2012 has a system here that was basically a single bar resource. That's your battery life, because I'm doing a low tech cyberpunk, like click wheel iPod cyberpunk.
Nice.
Um, so the idea that if I run this app, it's going to deplete my battery, but I can run it because it's powerful. It's sort of already considering this, and reading this document is helping me kind of contextualize it, having these powers that I want to fire off, but they have a cost of resource.
Right.
And since health, frankly, doesn't matter in Overwatch, pooling those things together makes perfect sense.
Right.
I'm also thinking of, this is a very different take, but the special meter in Tony Hawk of, if I biff a trick, my special meter is gone.
Right.
But if I do a bunch of tricks in a row, if I chain them together, I'm excelling on my level of skating. My special meter is full. It unlocks these really high point value tricks I can do that otherwise are behind a paywall, if you want to call it paid.
Sure.
And I think that's really the easiest thing. That's the easiest parallel I can draw, is when you successfully use your attributes, you gain X resource. Every time I snipe as Widowmaker, I gain 20% of this 100% capacity bar. And I'm going to mix my metaphors here for sure, of
Sure.
Overwatch and Cyber Metal, battery life, and everything. But the idea of, you start at 0, you want to get to 100 to do really cool shit. And I think if you're at 0 and then you fail is when bad things happen.
Mm.
And I think, and Overwatch seemingly just does the Blades in the Dark thing of, when you're dead, you're incapacitated,
Right.
and you as a player basically don't get to interact with the scene until you're revived. That works here because you have to wait to spawn in Overwatch when you die.
Right.
I'm also, right now I'm playing Far Cry, and there's a interesting thing because it's a single player open world. Well, there's an online, but anyway, I play single player online. There's my friend who's, right now it's a dog, but usually it's a person. And if I get killed in the middle of a mission, there's basically this the screen goes black and white and says like, you're gonna die.
Right.
But if you hold X, you can, quote, cling to life. And if your friend can get over to you in time before that bar goes all the way down, you get to come back in. You're not, that incapacitation doesn't last the whole scene.
Right.
And I think that's just how you implement it here, especially with healing characters. If Mercy flies over and reses me, then I'm back in and I have 25% of my bar filled up.
Right.
Because that's her prerogative. And taking her out of another situation to do that is its own thing, right? She's going to use a power to do that. So her own resource bar is going to be depleting. It's a risk,
Right.
but reviving me is not the risk. Taking her to a different position to do the revival power action is the risk.
Right.
So again, I think that's a really interesting thing. You don't Mercy doesn't roll to determine if she can bring me back to life. She just can. She has to gauge if it's worth it. If she's at 40% battery life and it costs 20 to revive somebody, and knowing that if you're at 20, you're halfway closer to dying than you are.
Right.
Um, if it's worth resing me, or if it's worth just doing this rest of the scene without me, letting me come to at the end, and then or trying to build a more advantageous situation like you would actually in the video game. Like, let's clear out this enemy, and once this tank is gone, then I'll come res you if you're still there.
So based off
So
of what you're saying here, are you thinking then that because you've got this sort of charging meter for health slash resource, that the powers themselves will have variable costs to them, or will all powers sort of just be like it's 20% of your battery, or
I think they're flat costs.
okay,
I think they're flat costs. One, because it makes more sense numerically and design wise.
right,
So, for an example, Mercy can like fly to relocate, and it's like 5 points or something because
mm,
like that's cheap. Actually, let's go back to Widowmaker because we already did that build. So
okay,
Widowmaker has the flat cost. So leverage is one of her attributes, and she can do that to gain positioning. But I think grapple gun becomes a power then, and grapple gun is basically like leverage plus plus. Like
mm,
grapple gun gets you into a position that you otherwise can't reach immediately. Like
right,
you are extracted from your danger and you are in an advantageous position, and that's dope. Because then from there you can use your leverage skill. So you want these like chain effects, like right? You want to use your power and then use your attribute. Like keep doing the things that you're good at. So grapple gun is a power, and it's a power that's relatively cheap. I mean, I'm thinking in increments of 5 because it
mm,
makes the math easier. And I think design wise, that probably makes the most sense. It's a little bit boring to me
mm,
of like, because then it becomes a D20 thing instead of a D100, but kind of getting crunched up in the math. But say grapple gun takes 5 points, and we're on a 0 to 100.
mm,
So you can use grapple gun. You can even use grapple gun like still have only spent 20 points.
right,
And in the grand scheme of things, that's not very many. I think you gain resource by doing your shit. I think every time you roll a 5 or 6, you like 10.
mm, mm,
Um, to have it codified again, not in inherent, not just in combat things like you killed a robot, so you get points. It's you did a thing that you are supposed to do because your character has these attributes, and I'm rewarding you. I think there's an interesting thing too of like it's not PBTA success ranges. The success ranges in the Lumen dice system are equal.
right,
Everything is 1/3. Obviously, the odds change with dice pools, but everything is really 1/3 chance. So it's not like you're getting one way more than the others. Where like in PBTA, you get 7 to 9
right,
way more than you get 10 plus. Um, so you don't necessarily have to accommodate that in the point system.
mm,
I think success is 10, not successing or not succeeding is 5, and failing is some cost. Um, in a way similar. I mean, I think you lose points when you
mm,
fail because that represents the robot shooting you
right,
instead of you shooting it. But also, again, blowing this out of just combat, when you tried to sneak into the ambassador's office using your espionage skill and you rolled a 2, you just got caught.
right,
And like your dice system, your result system already accommodates for there being consequences to failed rolls. This is one of those things that I think it's interesting because it's role play gaming or tabletop gaming. Video games don't reward you for failing.
mm,
That's the thing we've learned in tabletop to keep things moving and to keep players encouraged
Right.
to do things in a certain way. Is like, oh, when you succeed on a roll, you get what you wanted, but when so in the future you're going to get what you want. Here we're talking about characters that aren't learning from their mistakes. The characters in Overwatch already know all their shit.
Right.
So you don't reward a player who fails Widowmaker's snipe. Instead, you say, "Hey, get better at sniping." Uh, and
Get good, noob.
there's some really toxic gamer at it, but this works because now I'm going to be using my attributes as often as I can to
Mm,
get enough resource to do my powers. One success, one snipe as Widowmaker, and I get 10 points, that means I can use my grapple gun 2 times. But now for real quick theory, and I think we'll probably have to wrap up real quick soon, or I guess I'll have to lose my involvement, but you can carry on. Um, a second power for Widowmaker that's more costly and more powerful
mm.
is, let's say, because I know her special in the game is like the X-ray vision, so she can basically see everybody.
Yeah, I think
They
it
become
like everybody can, everyone on your
wireframes.
team can see all the
Oh
enemies
yeah,
that's
everyone on your team can. It's not just
right,
you. That's pretty big. So I think every character has this one supreme power,
right.
which is reflected in the video game as the triangle. Like you need to charge to 100 to use this.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our role playing game, you could do it from 80 or like 75 or something like that. Like
Right.
I don't think there's a realistic expectation that a player will hoard 100 resource ever. I think the cost can still be substantial, like a 30. But if you have 75 and you spend 30, one, you expect that to be something powerful, which is what the Overwatch specials are. And then two, it's not going to deplete your whole resource bar. You're still going to be able to do your other powers because
Right.
that's important. You don't want your coolest thing to wipe you out from doing anything else.
And to put you at death's door.
Right, right. I think so that's a balance, I think, of like, and maybe different characters have different thresholds.
Mm,
Like something like Tracer's Bomb, which I think happens quite a bit more frequently in the game. Like you can, like maybe it costs 20 to throw a bomb, um, and you can do it from having 50 resource.
right.
So like, and you can maybe you can save them up even. Like if I have 80 resource, I now can spend 2 bombs and still have half of my health left. Um,
It's like in a MOBA how there are different cooldowns and costs for
yeah,
the special ability, right? Like everybody's big special power charges at a different rate or can be used after a different variable amount of time, and then that is then
with
reflective
a
of
varied understanding of output too. Like Tracer's Bomb isn't as game changing as something like the big quadruped robot
oh yeah,
who puts down the drum and then it charges everybody up. Like that's a huge boon.
right,
So that's something you can only do after 80 resource and a 30-35 cost. Um, because it's like a game shifting
right,
situation. But Tracer's Bomb, like a lot of the time, whoever's playing Tracer is just gonna fire it off anyway. It like
right.
isn't part of your tactical plan. So, I mean, I think that's an interesting thing, and I think we don't necessarily need every character has. So, yeah, summing up the stuff we came up with today,
Mm,
every character has unique attributes to determine what their class build is.
love that
There's
so
still
much.
there's still player facing decisions here by assigning given numerals to those attributes to determine which of your given attributes is the one that you favor the most or the one that you will potentially use the least but still part of your repertoire. I think I kind of touched on this and didn't define it, but you have some role that you can do for for challenging actions that aren't covered by your attributes,
Right.
which I think is just a 2d6 take the lowest. It has a name, it has a game term,
Sure.
whatever. um, that's interesting. So attributes kind of define how your character can solve problems.
Mm,
Then you have your health and resource, which is sort of a combined. resource. The other thing in Overwatch, it's only really player facing. There's no in game explanation for why I can do these things at certain times.
Right.
I wonder, and same in Tony Hawk, like the skater isn't aware of their special bar. It's only the player playing the skater who's aware of the special bar. Um, so I wonder if there's potential there to have a narrative charging, like if the players can feel them, if the characters can feel that they're generating charge or something like that. That sounds cool. So call it charge, the health and resource combination. You're spending and accruing charge. You gain charge by using your attributes successfully. So again, we're rewarding pursuit of successful attribute use, not learn through failure, because our
Right.
characters already learned through failure, and that's how they got here. They're and this is a thing that Lumen talks about and is important. It's power fantasy. It's we're not level 0. We're already level 10.
Right.
So reward successes with more charge, and then use charge to implement these powers that are scalable. They like unlock at certain levels. Some of them are probably always available. I think grapple guns always, but then something like wireframe is only available after you accrue 65 charges
Right.
because it's going to be a lot more intense, consequential story focused action that doesn't just change how you play, changes how everyone on your team is playing and could effectively end the scenario. If your mission is to kill these 5 terrorists and now you can see through the walls and you know where each your mission's on its way to being over, and
Right.
that's great. Like as a role playing thing, that's great. You want that. So charge, you charge it, you build it to do really powerful stuff, but also depleting it is effectively the same as dying. And I think maybe again in the setting you can explain that like charge is a measure of energy that you absorb from I don't know, it's like bloodlust, right? Like
I'm thinking about Nova and how that works so well for in Nova you're these exosuits that are powered by solar power essentially, and
right.
spending it to use your powers and then gaining it back, linking it to life like that makes so much sense. But yeah, bloodlust or like adrenaline or whatever you want to call it in an Overwatch
Uh,
sort of setting.
yeah, I mean, the other thing is, I think the Overwatch setting is cool for Overwatch, but I think my game is not that.
Sure.
I think you know me, I know me, and I think enough of the people watching know that almost for sure this involves the devil and or some kind of like weird skull creatures,
I'd be
and
disappointed if
I
it didn't.
this has a skull on the cover. I'll tell you what, all my things now have skulls on the cover, and that's my brand, and I'm happy with it. So I would love to dig in for, and this sort of what we did here reflects about as far as I made in the doc
Mm,
in the minutes before the stream. Um, I would love to redo this with you sometime and revisit and get into broader, less character focused
mm,
build stuff of match types and what missions look
yeah.
like, and structuring adventures that you use these characters on and how mechanically that can be reflected in character driven stuff. Because the other thing about in Overwatch, you don't advance as your characters, you
Right.
don't gain new things, you just gain cool cosmetics. Um, and then a thing that they're putting into Overwatch 2 is these skill trees that you can kind of focus
Oh.
and develop further a focused intent for your character. Um, so we'll just put a pin in and say sometime we'll talk about adventure structure, and another time we'll talk about character advancement because I think that is a thing that's built into Light and Lumen
Right.
that's good, especially the way that Light emulates Destiny
Mm.
and gaining gear and like having um traders who can like sell you that gear at a cost if you do favors and stuff. I really love That's my favorite part of Light is the way it emulates adventure structure to keep you in the game loop.
Mm.
And I think the Overwatch game loop is different. I would like to poke at that sometime and figure that out.
Yeah, I'm really curious to kind of flesh that out with you or hear your thoughts about how that will work with this setting, this premise. This will be very cool.
Yeah, I think additionally on that note too, um, adventure structure, having an adventure structure that involves uh, the opposite of action.
Hmm.
Because the other thing about these games, like Destiny has your hub where you like talk to the leaders of the factions and you change your outfit and stuff,
Right.
and it's basically the lobby for an online space. Overwatch doesn't have that. You just go into matches, and when you're in there, you're kind of in there. And there's all these fun things of video game too, of like you have the 30-second countdown before your match starts and everyone's in the space and you have like your spray paint or whatever. Like there's a
Right.
communal aspect to this loading stage. But again, because I want to get into the sort of cinematic nature of Overwatch and
Mm.
not just matches and esports, I want my setting to be able to be lived in outside of conflict. And I want there to be role playing scenes and modes that involve you just chilling or
Right.
like your characters are in a space together on some kind of peaceful level. You can chill, you can eat, you can maybe tinker with your class advancement and
Mm.
characters builds and stuff, but generally just like role playing as people who are in a situation that is bigger than them. I think that's really interesting.
Totally. Hell yes. Well, I would love to continue this chat sometime. I'd love to do a part two on this.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Sweet. Well,
Um,
I know you've got a meeting and all that to go to. So
right.
let's wrap it up there. We'll put a pin in this. We will definitely return to, what did you call this? Paragons?
I call it Paragon, but I'm definitely gonna have to Google that, make sure.
Mm.
I actually think the characters in Pathfinder are called Paragons.
Oh, okay.
Like you have recurring. I think that might have been where I took it. But anyway, the idea that these characters are symbolic to a culture,
Right.
right? In Overwatch, they're effectively the superheroes to the mundane people.
Right.
And Overwatch does a really bad job of explaining the perspective of the mundane people
Mm.
and where they exist in this world that is effectively run by like robot terrorists.
Right.
Because, and I think that this is another tangent. I think that's why I really don't like the Avengers movies either, because there's
Mm.
no human perspective,
Right.
because everything is on a scale that is beyond my understanding as a regular, boring person with no specials. Um, I want, I think I want that. Normally in games, I don't like that on the ground. I want
Mm.
perspective.
Right.
I think with Paragons, we're only experiencing the world from the perspective of these extremely finessed
Right.
characters.
Cool. Well, do you want to do some plugs or shout outs and where people can find you just here at the end, and then we'll wrap up stream and find another time to chat about this.
For sure. I'm on Twitter at WC Game Co. My website is worldchamp.io, which is where you can get all of my games in print, including everything I mentioned today, which Scratch and Claw, the Scratch Off Mutant Animal Wasteland game, Necronautilus, my stoner metal science fantasy game. We talked about No Game, my Risograph zine of prose and game design using. Um, and Ether Operations, which I don't know if we mentioned, but it has that subjective skill list DNA really
Mm.
cooked into it, and that game actually just came out this week as well. And yeah, those are the best ways to get at me. Obviously, the podcast is everywhere that there are podcasts, and that comes out every week. The Tech Jam is currently on itch.io, but if you go to our Twitters, you'll find it that way because I don't know the link.
I don't know it either. People will be able to find it. Sweet. Adam,
Yeah.
thanks so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and talking about this. This was super exciting. I can't wait to see this evolve and chat with you again about it.
Yeah, this is going to be very fun, very cool. I'm excited to. I mean, I think you. I almost goes without saying. I think you're an designer, and you have these really great ways of cooking tech from other worlds in, and I think that's a really valuable thing that all game design perspective, right? Of like I have this visual design background, and it allows me
Mm.
to put my game at the forefront. The way that you can play a video game and dilute its mechanics to not just probability, but also player choice is really interesting. It makes these translations that you do really fascinating. And I think me having Lumen now, and I imagine everyone else having it very shortly, opens up that door to a lot of other people who have proclivities for video games without necessarily understanding or desiring to translate them. Like I haven't played Overwatch in 2 years, and now I'm so hyped to make an Overwatch tabletop game
Right.
because of this thing that you created. So
Well, I did tweet right before this that Lumen is my revenge plan against the gamers. That we're gonna just take all their games and turn them into role-playing games. So that's
yeah, we're gonna
the
take all the serial numbers off.
exactly. Right on. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We are gonna wrap it up, but have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.